Well, grand rising to all of you, my family and friends, and of course, welcome to Ilana Monet's Motivational Moment. Before I start, I have to do my salutations. Abarakani. Assalamu alaikum. Ikaru. Now that I've done my salutations, let's get into the meat for the message for today. Now, today we're going to continue our series on the African American history before 1865. Now today we're going to talk about slave resistance, rebellions, and runaways. Now, one of the ways for African kids to resist the system that they were placed in, they would do rebellions, they would run away, and they will also do little small things that's not eating, which the slave master came up with another way of force feeding them by breaking their front teeth and sticking a tube down their throat and stuffing the food through the tube. So even though they did certain things to try and take a stand, they counteracted with something much more brutal. So slave resistance was a powerful force against the brutal institution of slavery in the Americas. Enslaved Africans employed various methods to oppose their oppression, from day-to-day acts of defiance to organized rebellions and escapes. The Underground Railroad and the major slave uprisings like Nat Turner Rebellion challenged the slavery or the system of slavery. These acts of resilience these acts demonstrated the agency of enslaved people and contribute to the growth tension that ultimately led to the Civil War and the abolition or the abolishment. So now we're going to talk about the key concepts and definition. Slave resistance encompassed various methods enslaved Africans used to oppose their enslavement and assess their humanity. Often acts of enslaved people fleeing plantations to establish independent communities, such as the Moor Society. Petit Moor involved short-term absences from plantations, often to visit families or to avoid punishment. Grand Mirage refers to permanent escape from slavery, often to remote areas or other colonies. Slave rebellions were organized, aimed uprisings by enslaved people against slaveholders and the institution of slavery. The Underground Railroad was a clandestine network of routes, safe houses, and abolitions that helped enslaved people escape to free slaves or to Canada. Slave codes were laws designed to restrict the rights and freedoms of enslaved Africans and to protect the institute of slaveholders. The abolition was a movement to the end of the transatlantic slave trade and the institution of slavery. Now let's talk about its historical content. The transatlantic slave trade forcibly transported millions of Africans to the Americas between the 16th and the 18th century. Enslaved Africans faced brutal conditions, including forcible labor, physical punishment, family separation, and cultural suppression. The institution of slavery was central to the economic growth of the European colonies and the United States. Let me read that again. The institution of slavery was central to the economic development of European colonies and the United States. Enslaved people resisted their oppression by the early days of the slave trade using methods of undermining the system. The Haitian Revolution in 1791 through 1804 inspired enslaved people throughout the Americas and fueled fears of rebellion among slaveholders. The abolition movement gained momentum in the late 18th and early 19th centuries advocating for the end of slavery on morals and religious grounds. Slave rebellions and resistance played a significant role in the abolition of or the abolishment of slavery in the United States and other parts of the Americas. Now, forms of slave rebellion or resistance, day-to-day resistance including slowing down of work, faking illnesses, breaking tools, and engaging in acts of sabotage. These subliminal forms of resistance allow enslaved people to assess some control over their lives and to undermine the efficiency of the plantation system. Cultural resistance included maintaining African traditions, creating new cultural forms like spiritual or folk tales, and developing coded communications. Just going to stick a pin right there. With coded communications, we still use that today. If you've ever been around the drug trade, or if you heard anything about the drug trade, they have a whole different type of coding. They have a different type of language that they use, and that only the other person who is well versed in this coding would know exactly what is being said. They will talk about the weather, which could ultimately mean something else. So we have always been a nation, or a nation of people, who believed in coding, who believed in changing things around to make things suit what we needed for it to be. Now, runaways was a common form of resistance. Enslaved people fleeing to more communities, free states, or even other countries. Some runaways, like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, became prominent abolitionists and worked to help others escape from slavery. We would like to take this time out, put a pin, and just to thank Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman for their roles in the Underground Railroad, helping our people to become free. And it is amazing how some of our people, even though we were in bondage, and we had been in bondage so long and been afraid so long, that we chose to stay in slavery because that's the only thing that we knew. So some of us even resisted being free. Because what is freedom? And I would like to pose that question to you today. What do you consider freedom? Are we living in a land of the free and home of the brave? Or are we living in a dictatorship where someone tells us what to think, someone tells us how to believe, someone tells us when to wake up, what we can see, what we can eat? What kind of nation are we living in? Like I've said on numerous occasions before, America was not the America that other immigrants sought after, home of the free and brave and home of opportunities. For us, America was the epitome of slavery, where our roots or where our freedoms were taken. So America could have a different definition for African Americans. They say that this is a place where anything can happen except for African Americans. You can own anything in America except for African Americans. It is so amazing how people of the Asian descent, people of the Arabic descent come into communities which are prominently black, which are told that they have no money. They told that they are underprivileged, underserviced, and they start a business in our communities. And we in the community, being of fair skin, cannot get a break. We can't get loans. They get loans, they don't even have to pay them back. 'Cause let me tell you what they do. They don't have to pay the loan off. The first one doesn't have to pay the loan off for 7 years. So within the 5th year, they turn the business over to someone in their family. They in turn get a whole new business, another 7 years. 5th year, turn it over to the family members. So it's a revolving, no taxes, no anything, but African Americans who pay into these things We don't get a say-so in anything. How can people of the Asian descent go into an African-American community and start a hair store? Who's buying the hair? Who's buying the clothing? They go and like now they're starting supermarkets. Have you been into some of the supermarkets that are in the African American community? Have you seen the produce? Have you smelled the area? None of those things, they just don't compute to me. We as a people need to come together, put our resources together, and start our own. Pour into our own. Support your African American businesses. And those of you who do have African American businesses, make sure that your customer service is on point. No one likes to pay their money and be treated like crap. A little hint to the wise. Now, enslaved people also engaged in open rebellions. Oh, I'm sorry. I did read that. No, I didn't. Enslaved people also engaged into open rebellion, organizing armed uprisings against slaveholders and the institution of slavery. Resistance through legal channels include filing lawsuits for freedom, petitioning courts and litigation, and using the legal system to challenge slavery. Now, the problem with that is they have made so many rules legally about slavery that it is hard to fight through those things, because every time a person was able to use their laws, good morning, Imani, hi baby, you to use their laws against them, they changed it and they amended that particular thing so that we could have a loophole. So we do need to go and change the laws so that it will help to suit the African American society. Now, enslaved people formed networks of community and support. They shared information about escape routes, impending punishments, and the resistance of effects. Now, here are some of the slave rebellions. The Sonano Rebellion of 1739 in South Carolina involved over 20 enslaved Africans who killed slave owners, and marched towards Spanish Florida before being suppressed. The Gabriel's Union Rebellion in 1800s in Virginia was planned by Gabriel Presser and involved thousands of enslaved people, but it was discovered and the whole thing was broken because someone in the African American society went and told on them. So it is amazing how even though we are in bondage, we are so afraid that we had to tell what was going on. Being a united force and coming together is the only thing that African Americans can do to change the rules that they have set for us. Now, the German Coast Uprising in 1811 in Louisiana led to Charles Decimus, involving hundreds of enslaved people who marched on New Orleans before being defeated. Desmark Vesey controversy in 1822 in Charleston, South Carolina, was an elaborate plot involving thousands of enslaved people, but was revealed by informers before it could be carried out. Once again, self-defeating. Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831 in Virginia results in the death of over 50 white people before Turner and his followers were captured and executed. The rebellion led to increased restrictions on slave people and the suppression of the abolitionist activities in the South. The Amistad Rebellion in 1839 occurred aboard a slave ship, where captives took control of the vessel and eventually won their freedoms in the U.S. Supreme Court cases. These rebellions, while ultimately suppressed, determined the agency and the resilience of enslaved people and fueled fear among slaveholders. Now, the Underground Railroad and the escape networks. The Underground Railroads was a secret network of routes, safe houses, and abolitions that helped enslaved people escape to free states or Canada. To operate from the late 18th century until the end of the Civil War, helping an estimated 30,000 to 100,000 enslaved people escaped. Harriet Tubman, a former enslaved person, became one of the most famous conductors of the Underground Railroad, making 19 trips and helping over 300 people escape slavery. Other notable figures in the Underground Railroads were William Steele, Levi Coffey, and John Brown. William Steele, a free-born black abolitionist, kept detailed records of the people he helped escape and later published them in a book. Escape networks also existed in the parts of America, such as Brazil, which enslaved people freed and are called the Moor communities. Free black communities in the North and Canada provided support and refuge for those who escaped to slavery there. The Underground Railroad and escape networks determined the institution of slavery and determined the determination of enslaved people to seek freedom. The Underground Railroad and escape networks undermined the institution of slavery and demonstrated the determination of enslaved people to seek freedom. And I want to put a pin right here. Some people, even on the slave ships, would rather drown themselves than to go to an unknown place, being placed in unknown things in order to become free. Now, the impacts of slavery and the society. Slave resistance and rebellions created a consistent state of fear and relaxed anger slaveholders who responded with increasingly oppression and violence. The threat of the rebellion led to the development of slave patrols and enforcement to strict the slave codes designed to limit the mobility and freedom of enslaved people. Let's put a pin there. Even today, people will use the cops as a form of control, even though they have no right to ask me where I'm going, who I'm going to see. It's just like asking me for my papers. It's nothing different, but they enable the police, or they get the police involved, because that's one of the malicious, or the KKK. They hid up under those hoods, and they often were a part of law enforcement. Now, resistance and escape attempts disrupted the plantation's economy, as enslaved people represent a significant financial investment to slaveholders. The Underground Railroad and the abolition movement challenged the moral and legal foundations of slavery, contributing to the growth sectional tensions. Slave narratives such as those by Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs exposed the horrors of slavery to a wider audience and the support of the abolition movement. The actions of resilience, enslaved people, and abolition united ultimately contribute to the outbreak of the Civil War and the inevitable abolition of, or the abolishment of, slavery in the United States. Now, the legacy and historical significance. Slave resistance and rebellions demonstrated the agency of humanity of enslaved Africans, countering the notion that they were passive victims. The legacy of resistance continued to inspire modern Civil War and civil justice movements. The Underground Railroad has become the enduring symbol of the struggle of freedom and the power of the collective action. The Moor societies, such as those of the Jamaican and Surnames, have left a lasting culture and political legacy in the Caribbean and South America. The studies of slave resistance has expanded our understanding of African diaspora and the global impact of slavery. Museums and historical sites such as the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center preserves the memories of those who fought against slavery. The stories of enslaved people who resisted and rebelled served as a reminder for the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. Now, future readings and resources that you really need to look into. Number one, The Slave Cause, The History of the Abolition by Mashada Shaheen. African Slavery, African Freedom by Edwin Morgan. Slave Counterparts, Black Culture in the 18th Century, Chesapeake and Low Country by Philip D. Morgan. Closer to Freedom, Enslaved Women and Everyday Resistance in the Plantation South by Stephanie M.H. Camp. The Rebellion Slave, Nat Turner, and American History Memory by Scott French. Gateway to Freedom, The Hidden Story of the Underground Railroad by Eric Fenner. Slavery Exiles, The Story of the African Moors by Savannah D. Defoe. The National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Connecticut, Ohio. Now, this is just a little tidbit of the slave resilience. You really do need to read up on your history. Find out about your history, because if you do not know your history, you are bound to repeat it. So with that being said, make sure you go out and check my YouTube page, Elonda Monet Hatter. I have a lot of more information out there, a lot of other videos that you guys could look at. Remember, know your history, know from whence you have come, and how far we still have to go. Even with the people that we have in place today, we are still trying to fight for our freedom. So with that being said, guys, I have got to go. I love you, but God loves you more. And always remember, I will see you at the top, because the bottom is way too crowded. Peace.